Well, hello there. I am Stephen Goldman, your convivial host for this Infinite Inning reissue, number 4 in that series, and it revisits episode 44 from back in the show's first year. In our latest new episode, I mentioned the so-called Crybaby Cleveland team of 1940, and so I thought I should reissue the episode in which we told that story. Oddly, although I remember telling it, I don't see any evidence of that happening. What's more likely is I sideswiped it while telling stories about some of the players involved, like Johnny Allen, the pitcher with the anger management problem. I've told Allen's story before, no doubt we'll get to him on this reissue series, but to sum him up, very effective when healthy, but he so rarely answered to that description, in part because he started late. He wasn't as good as Jacob deGrom, but he was similar in that sense. He did get the run support, so his won-loss records are a lot better than deGrom's, actually. And of course, there was his temper, sometimes earned, mostly not. Although, thinking about it, there were some exceptions. In July 41, the Browns put Allen on waivers. He was only with the Browns because of that degraded condition of his arm, and the Dodgers claimed him, even though he was pitching to a 6.58 ERA at the time. They needed the rotation depth as they were in a close pennant race with the Cardinals, and it must have been as obvious to most every general manager of the 1940s as it would be today to ask of every pitcher, well, what if he wasn't with the Browns? I'm not saying that Dodgers general manager Larry McPhail was looking at Allen's FIP and saying, you know, with some real gloves behind him, his ERA would be 2.5 runs lower. But scouting would have given him some sense of that. Well, they picked him up, and yes, with Pee Wee Reese instead of Johnny Berardino behind him, he pitched a lot better. He was still angry, though. It's just who he was. On September 15th, he started against a good Reds team in Cincinnati, 2-time defending pennant winners, and no one could score. Not the Dodgers, despite a lineup with 3 future Hall of Famers in it and some guys who are almost that good. Not to mention, now that I think about it, the first baseman who would soon be voted the National League MVP, and not the Reds with 2 future Hall of Famers and, again, a number of guys who were quite good in theirs. They also started Paul Derringer, who was a 4-time 20-game winner, including that season. The game was scoreless through 16 innings. Batters are taking 0 for 8s, 1 for 8s, and because it was when it was, or I should say the era that it was, the managers, Leo DeRocher on the Dodgers side and Deacon Bill McKechnie on the Red side, just didn't make any change. They just let the starters keep going pitch after pitch. Between innings, Leo would try to comfort Johnny and just say, you're doing such a good job. Just keep hanging in there and we'll get you some runs. You know what, though? They never did. Allen came out after 15 shutout innings, and it wasn't until the top of the 17th the Dodgers broke through against Paul Derringer, still in there, when Pistol Pete Reissue led off the frame with a home run. They then tacked on a few more as the exhausted Reds started dropping balls and throwing them away. They almost gave the game back via Leo's fireman, Hugh Casey, who was used to pitching long appearances. Leo could have gone to him any time, but no, Johnny Allen had to be the martyr. A year or so later, there was an occasion when he got really mad and came close to choking out an umpire. That's only slightly hyperbolic, and there's no excuse for that. For the assault, I mean, not for the hyperbole. But when thinking about that game, I always think about this one and figure that you could see a guy being frustrated, spending 15 innings under the hot sun with no run support. Now, the glass half full view, of course, would be, gee, I just threw a game and a half of shutout baseball, go me. But Johnny Allen wasn't necessarily that sort of fella. Not having told the 1940 Crybaby story in detail, maybe that's something I will try to get to, perhaps as soon as the next new episode. It all depends on current events and whether we want to react to them, and of course how the Zephyr, the Sirocco of creativity, strikes me. So without the Crybabies, what to do? I gravitated to episode 44 because it contains 2 stories that I enjoyed telling, especially the tale of Dodgers third baseman Cookie Lavagetto and a fan whose worship of him bordered on toxic. Not toxic like the stalkers who shot Billy Georges or Eddie Waitkus in separate incidents, but just toxic because it was way too demonstrative. Maybe that's in the eye of the beholder. I've had two very casual relationships in my life, one in high school, one as a professional, which I thought were arm's length and dispassionate. The high school one was female, the professional one male, and I hasten to point out that by relationship, I just mean friendship bordering on acquaintanceship. Collegial, but not intimate in any sense. And yet, when I happened to catch up with those 2 years later, again in separate incidents, they both said in so many words, "Boy, did we have an intense friendship. We had some real barn burner arguments." And in both cases, my answer was, not to me. I mean, I had barely thought about these people. In the case of the young woman, she was just someone who was around and seemed a lot too volatile, a lot too Johnny Allen-like for safety, and the fellow was a colleague to whom I sometimes said, "What if instead of doing this your way, we try it my way?" And I was in a position to make my way stick, though I never forced the issue because leadership is the art of persuasion, not diktat. Thinking about it, what I wonder is if those people grew up in very quiet, very compliant households. My parents always encouraged me to try to get my way, not to argue back, although that happened, but to reason back. Often they would let reason win the day, but sometimes, because they were human, they just let their authority as parents vanquish reason. They had taught me to see that as unfair and an abdication. But sometimes the people you love most disappoint you. And even in that, they're doing you a favor by teaching a different kind of lesson. One about how people are inherently unreliable, and that every now and again, even the people you depend on most may disappoint you. In either case, I grew up with a lot of back and forth, and maybe for those people, in their households, yes meant yes and no meant no, and they never had any actual dialogue. So what was a casual interaction to me, "Hey, Gladys, you want to get burgers or pizza for lunch?" was to them a huge Donnybrook, because at their house it was, "You'll take burgers and you'll like it." Maybe that explains a lot about where we are as a society today. Wouldn't surprise me. It seems to me now that Cookie's biggest fan might have learned that lesson about people disappointing you too, because he occupied a rather strange space. I don't know if we have a word for this. What if someone offers you love, and that love is not unrequited or unappreciated, but you don't want all of it? There's too much of it. You just want 10 to 15%, like a tip. That's what Cookie was saying to his biggest fan. Forgive me, but he was saying not the whole thing, just the tip. This episode originally featured a guest spot by my close friend, the writer Cliff Corcoran. As you know, Cliff is the man of 1,000 baseball caps. He always takes pains to say that the 1,000 thing is hyperbolic, but I like it, and I'm sticking with it. I insist there's a fortress-like climate-controlled vault of hats somewhere here in New Jersey. Before turning to current events baseball, we almost always began with a chat about hats, and some of them got pretty deep into the weeds. How do you get an accurate replica today of the cap that Branch Rickey wore as manager of the 1914 Browns? No one does the seams correctly. Damn them. I always worried that listeners would find that much too granular for their interest, but when I look back at the old comments, no one complained. They complained about some of the hobby horses of my other guests or some of mine, specifically immigration, but not seams and buttons on century-old hats. For that, as for all of your time and attention, I am grateful. That's pretty much all from me this reissue, though you may hear from me again if I need to patch over some of the old material or bridge a break. And so, on the other side of one of those aforementioned breaks, here are two Brooklyn Dodgers stories. First, the often confused pitcher Brickyard Kennedy from the 19th century, and then Cookie Lavagetto, and way too many balloons. Gee, but I'd like to have a balloon right now. They're great fun, but also a massive impediment. Once you have one tied to your wrist, I mean, have you ever tried to squish one back into the car after your day at the amusement park? Life is like that. Many who try to escape from the infinite inning find themselves running towards what they were running away from, but there are exits if you're smart enough to take them. Or brave enough. I just don't know if anyone ever has been. Back in the 1890s, from 1892 to 1901, the pre-Dodgers Brooklyn Dodgers, they were called the Superbas and the Bridegrooms, had a pitcher named Bill Brickyard Kennedy. One of the first things that you have to understand about Brickyard was that during his career, no one called him Brickyard. He was called Roaring Bill because he was loud and somewhat belligerent, and I suspect, as with many players at that time, often intoxicated. He was teammates with outfielder Oyster Burns, who wasn't called Oyster, so you have two guys who come down to us in history by names that they would not have answered to when they were alive. Bill was a pretty good pitcher. He was league average overall, but with run support, he was able to win 20 games 4 times. He also lost 20 games 5 times, often in the same season. There are not a ton of stories about Kennedy, but many of them are about him not being particularly smart, and I suspect they're not really about him and didn't really happen to him. They just became attached to him over time. There are 3 different stories you can find that involve him throwing the ball in inappropriate ways at inappropriate people. On one occasion, he was supposedly angry at Hank O'Day, the umpire. This is the same guy who would later decide the Fred Merkle game against the Giants. He didn't like the calls O'Day was making, so he crossed up his own catcher by aiming the next pitch at the umpire. The ball got away, and a run scored. There are so many variants of this next one, but supposedly John McGraw, coaching third, tried the, hey, let me see that ball trick, and Kennedy, obliging, threw it towards McGraw, who stepped aside, and again, a run scored. And there's yet another involving a third base coach, in which the third base coach, as Kennedy was getting ready to deliver his pitch, broke for home as if he were the base runner, and Kennedy, trying to prevent the steal, quick pitched the ball home. The catcher was in no way ready for it, the ball got away, and the actual runner scored. I don't know which of these are true. I do suspect this one is, though. On some occasion, somewhere in his Dodgers stay, and none of the retellings of this story that I have found specify a date, but let's guess it was his first year in the majors. It was 1892. The Dodgers were going to the Polo Grounds in New York to play the Giants, and for whatever reason, they didn't go together. They were just told to show up, and Kennedy didn't know how to just show up to Upper Manhattan from Brooklyn at that time. He was supposed to take a train, he knew that. Well, he couldn't identify the train, because he couldn't read. There are stories about him that anticipate Shoeless Joe Jackson, in that if his teammates were going to have dinner, he would let everybody else order, and since he couldn't read the menu, he would then order what they had. He wandered about the train station trying to decipher the New York rail grid, which can be confusing to the newcomer even today, and eventually he asked a policeman for assistance. And what he managed to convey to the police officer was, 1, that he could not read the signs and therefore did not know where to go, and that 2nd, he was a stranger here, being from Ohio. The policeman somehow understood him to say that Kennedy was trying to get to Ohio, and so directed him to a westbound train. Kennedy got on the train. Kennedy did not go to the Polo Grounds. The idea of the unintended or misdirected trip can be very frightening. I think often of the demise of Edgar Allan Poe, which most likely involved a whole lot of alcohol, but the basis of it is that in September 1849, he got on a boat that was supposed to be traveling from Richmond to New York, and he had intended to get off in Philadelphia to pick up a check. Baltimore was not on the itinerary. Nevertheless, he was next seen 7 days later in Baltimore in a state of extreme disrepair. He was either very ill or very smashed, or both. He was wearing clothes that were not his own. He did not have his luggage. And since he never recovered a state of consciousness or sufficient lucidity to explain what had happened to him and to all his stuff, to this day, no one knows. In his delirium, he called out for a man named Reynolds, and no one knows who that was. Supposedly, his last words were, "Lord help my poor soul." He died in hospital 4 days after being discovered. That's the dark, scary side of unplanned travel, when you intend to go to New York and end up dead in Baltimore. But Kennedy is a little different. And in some tellings of the story of his train trip, it is suggested that he did not, in fact, disembark from the train until he reached Ohio. And that is not a mistake. That is a commitment. Because as anyone who has taken a train trip knows, you have many opportunities to leave the train because of all the intermittent stops. This isn't the same as a direct flight. You have lots of layovers, so to speak, on train trips. And I love that idea. I don't believe it. I suspect maybe he got across the Hudson and realized he was in the wrong place, that it couldn't possibly take this long to get from Brooklyn to Upper Manhattan. But who knows? Maybe he got as far as Pennsylvania. I'm not really sure. But at some point he had to know. As the conductor is saying, "Next stop, Scranton," he must have twigged to the idea that he was not on the correct train. But I love the idea that he just stayed. It's so very zen. Oh well, this isn't where I'm supposed to be, but it's where I'm meant to be. And I think it would be a much better story if he never came back. In fact, he did. He pitched until 1903. And if he's remembered much at all, it's because Pittsburgh Pirates manager Fred Clark tabbed him to start Game 5 of the first World Series, 1903. He matched up against Cy Young, of all people. It was Kennedy's 36th birthday, and he didn't have much left in the tank. It was his last major league game, in fact. He actually pitched quite well to a point. He and Young pitched mutual shutouts until the 6th, and at that point, Boston, the opponent, just started pounding him mercilessly, and he gave up 10 runs, very few of which were earned. After that, as many players did at that time, Kennedy pitched his way back downward through the minors. He pitched a couple years in West Virginia and then at Dayton. He retired in 1908, and at that point he had about 7 years remaining. Tuberculosis got him in 1915. But maybe if he had stayed on the train, it might have been different. No, there wouldn't have been a 1903 World Series game for history to remember him, but maybe greater opportunities awaited him in Ohio or California if he'd kept going, Japan if he'd gotten on a boat at that point. It's asking a lot, expecting somebody to be brave enough to do that, to accept that fate has put them on a voyage west and just say, "I'm not going to interrupt this. I'm just going to stay on the ride for as long as it goes. Don't call me Brickyard, call me Roaring Bill. And I roar because fate has set me in the direction of the setting sun, and I want that thing to know I'm coming." I wish I could be like that. I'm Stephen Goldman, and this is the Infinite Inning Baseball Podcast. We'd like to call this meeting of the Rockstar Theatrical Organization to order. As you know, we're here to determine the content of next summer's large theatrical offering, our new Broadway musical. Because of the success of Hamilton, we feel that the show must have an American historical theme. Here are some of the leading candidates. The Farmers' Alliance! Set in the 1870s, this focuses on the agrarian sector's efforts to form a union-like cooperative to combat monopolistic railroad practices, only to be derailed by virulent racism. We believe it's very promising. The big song is Omaha, which sounds a lot like Camelot, only it's about maintaining segregation in public accommodations. Pass, I think. Pass. Okay, well, we have Detroit for defense! 2 exclamation points. In fact, one after Detroit, one after defense. When World War II strikes, African Americans flood north to take jobs in defense plants, where they are welcomed with open arms, except by the majority of residents who try to burn them out of their new home. The big song is the protagonist's defiant anthem, "A tank isn't black or white, it's khaki," which sounds a lot like I Could Have Danced All Night. We'll pass. I don't understand. Don't we have any submissions based in American history that don't culminate in progress being derailed by racism? None.
contradiction in terms. I'm sorry. Well, what about this one? It's episode 44. It's about baseball. Well, that's American. It's promising. What's the big song? Well, there isn't a big song exactly, but a bunch of ball players do a 20-minute ballet about groin pulls. We'll take it. Episode 44, exclamation point. Look on that and weep, Lin-Manuel Miranda. The entirety of Act 5 is about Jackie Robinson. Before we get to that, though, a warning appropriate for this time of year as baseball gears up again and our affection for the game surges to the fore and fills us with a euphoria that can so easily carry us away. There are many unhealthy ways of being a baseball fan. Third baseman Cookie Lavagetto was kind of a baseball Zelig or Forrest Gump. He wasn't a particularly great player, but he turned up in a lot of important places, or at least marginally important places. I don't think that's what it was about him that hooked Jack Pierce, though. For some background, Cookie was born Enrico Attilio Lavagetto, but as a child, he Americanized it to Harry Arthur Lavagetto. He was from Oakland, which was a hotbed of baseball talent back at the beginning of the 20th century. The whole Bay Area was. Both Cookie and Augie Gallen were born in 1912, Gallen over in Berkeley. Gallen was really good, kind of a prehistoric Bernie Williams. Ernie Lombardi was also from Oakland. He was a few years older than they were. Joe DiMaggio was born in Martinez, California in 1914, not far away, and of course ended up in San Francisco. Frankie Crissetti, 1910 in San Francisco. Pitcher Jim Tobin, who hit 3 home runs in a single game for the Braves in 1942. He was also born in Oakland in 1912. He lost 21 games that year, but oh well. Lefty Gomez, 1908, about 25 miles away. Dolph Camilli, 1907, San Francisco. Dario Lodigiani, I like saying that name, San Francisco, 1916. Les Garcella, born in Santa Cruz, but grew up in Richmond, just on the other side of Berkeley, 1913. After that group of guys were done playing in the majors, about half of them, Lavagetto, Lodigiani, Lombardi, Scarcella, Tobin, they end up playing on some really good Oakland Oaks teams in the 1940s Pacific Coast League. And one of their teammates is a 20-year-old, also from Berkeley, named Alfred Manuel Martin, although he was born Alfred Manuel Pisano Jr. If you can imagine the Billy Martin story as some kind of really perverted, drunken retelling of Snow White, these guys were some of his 7 dwarves. Then, a bit further down the line in his post-playing career, Lavagetto was the last manager of the original Washington Senators and, for all of 59 games, the first manager in the history of the Minnesota Twins, where he could be found complaining that there were too many Hispanics in the game, and how could we grow new American baseball fans if all the players were from Latin America? This always struck me as an odd and unfortunate and short-sighted thing for anybody to say, but especially for a first-generation American, which is what Cookie Lavagetto was. Parenthetically, he came by the name Cookie because his first pro team was the Oaks. He joined them at 19 or 20 in 1933, and the owner of the Oaks was called Cookie, and he became known as Cookie's Boy, and then that was too much for people to say, so it just got shortened to Cookie, and that's how he was known when he made the majors with the 1934 Pirates. Pirates gave him a couple of chances, mostly to play second base. They still had an aging Pie trainer lying around, blocking him at the hot corner, and I guess they decided he couldn't play the Keystone. So in the winter of 1936, they made not a terrible trade if you like trading 24-year-olds for veteran left-handers. They traded him for a pretty decent pitcher named Ed Brandt, but Ed only had 1 year left before his arm fell off. So that just kind of added to this long-term malaise that the Pirates were in. In any case, the big thing that Cookie is remembered for happened when he was playing third base for the Brooklyn Dodgers.
And what was that thing? We'll find out after this brief intermission. Stick with me, won't you? Me in the past, I mean.
He was a good player for them. He was a right-handed, opposite field hitting singles and doubles guy who took a lot of walks so that his on-base percentage gave him some production despite a general lack of power. In his best year, which was 1939, he hit 300 with only 10 home runs, but he added 78 walks. And you'd think you would remember a player who could do that kind of thing, but he wasn't consistent at that level. And more significantly, when war broke out, he knew how to fly. He had taken flying lessons, and he enlisted in the Navy right away, hoping to be a flyer. And it didn't work out that way. The government made him play baseball. But regardless, he missed his age 29 through age 32 seasons, 4 solid years of just nothing, because he was busy entertaining the servicemen. And although that's not something we would look at as a heroic role in the war, he was offering some distraction to the guys who were playing the heroic roles, so there's some value to it. When he came back, he was no longer starting material. I mean, he's 33, he played off the bench, he did some pinch hitting, and in 1947, his last year in the majors, he played in only 41 games and batted 82 times. They were a good 82 plate appearances. He reached base at a 370 clip, but he's more or less the last man on the roster. Even so, the Dodgers won the National League pennant that year, and Lavagetto is going to the 1947 World Series against the Yankees. And some of you are probably way ahead of me on his participation in one of the most famous events in World Series history. Now, this is not actually the story that I'm telling today, but I'd still like to dwell on it for a second, because Lavagetto's big moment was set up by what has to be still one of the dumbest managerial moves in history. It's Game 4 of the series, Dodgers against the Yankees at Brooklyn. The Yankee starter, Bill Bevins, has a no-hitter going to the bottom of the ninth, but he also has no command. So he's already walked 8 and allowed a run. So the score is 2-1 Yankees. The Dodgers still have every opportunity to win the game. One important thing to remember that the Yankees manager Bucky Harris forgot was that the day before, Dodgers outfielder Pete Reissue, who was always getting hurt, badly jammed his ankle sliding into second on an attempted steal. This was in the bottom of the first. He stayed in the game for half an inning, but the ankle swelled up really badly. He was pinch hit for in the second, and he didn't start that day's game for the very good reason that he physically was incapable of running. He is, for all practical purposes, like a large fountain in a public park. He is a stationary object. So let me return you to the bottom of the ninth. With 1 out, Carl Furillo walks. That's walk number 9 for Bevins. And there's some irony here, because Bucky Harris was actually a pioneer of reliever usage, breaking in both Furpo Marbury and Joe Page as firemen. But he's not moving here because it's a no-hitter, and damn it, you can't yank a starting pitcher out of a no-hitter because God said so somewhere. So he is nailed to the bench. Still, Bevins gets a foul pop for another out, so they're 2 down, runner on first. And at that point, Dodgers manager Bert Schotten makes 2 moves. He pinch runs for Furillo with Al Gianfrido, and he pinch hits for the pitcher with Reissue. Everyone knows, except perhaps Harris, Reissue can't run. So, you make the call. What do you do? Well, before you can decide, Gianfrido steals second, so now you've got a base open. The batter on deck is Eddie Stanky, an extremely patient hitter, like 140 walks a year patient. Reissue is left-handed, Bevins is right-handed, so if you're looking for the platoon advantage and you're not going to the pen, well, you might not want to pitch to Reissue. But that's only if Reissue can run. He's normally a very fast outfielder, but in this instance, who knows? He might collapse before he gets to first base. Maybe he grounds the ball into the outfield, but if the outfielder picks it up fast enough, you might be able to throw him out at first before he hobbles down the line. Well, Bucky Harris considers all this information, and he holds up 4 fingers. He intentionally walks Reissue. Now Schotten made 2 more moves. One, obviously, he pinch ran for Reissue, and he pinch hit for Stanky with Lavagetto. At this point, I think I'll just turn the call over to Red Barber so you can hear what happened. It's one of the great calls.
Well, Eddie Stanky is stepping in. Wait a minute. Stanky is being called back from the plate, and Lavagetto goes up to hit. The Yankees are ahead 2-1. Gianfrido, the pinch runners at second, the tying run. Mixes the winning runs at first base. Both of them on with walks, both the pinch runners. No hits by Bevins. 8 2/3 innings. 2 out last of the ninth. The pitch to Lavagetto, swung on and missed. The fastball, it was in there. Strike 1. Gianfrido walks off second. Mixes off first. They're both ready to go on anything. 2 men out, last of the ninth. The pitch swung on. There's a drive hit out toward the right field corner. Henrik is going back. He can't get it. It's off the wall for a base hit. Here comes the tying run, and here comes the winning run. Friends, they're killing Lavagetto, his own teammates. They are beaten him to pieces. And it's taken a police escort to get Lavagetto away from the Dodgers.
You might have noticed that even in 1947, Red Barber had no interest in that dumb old superstition about not mentioning a no-hitter on the air. But that's not the story I'm telling either. This is. Jack Pierce was a Brooklyn contractor who also owned 2 restaurants. He was a Cookie Lavagetto fan. Like, to an unhealthy extent, he was a Cookie Lavagetto fan. I mean, he was like this.
What starts with the letter C? Cookie starts with C. Let's think of other things that starts with C. Who cares about other things? C is for cookie. That's good enough for me.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist, but it's more or less accurate. Pierce sat behind the third base dugout so he could be closer to where Lavagetto played. And as soon as he got to his seat, and he went to just about every game, he missed maybe 1 or 2 a year, he would take out a big blanket and spread it on the dugout roof. And the blanket had emblazoned on it the words, 6 for 6, Cookie, the best third baseman in the league, always good in the clutch. This was a very wordy blanket. It was an accurate blanket, too, at least insofar as the 6 for 6. Cookie had indeed done that in a 22-4 Dodgers win over the Phillies at Philadelphia on September 23rd, 1939. But that wasn't enough for Pierce. That didn't satisfy him. A real fan doesn't stop there. He doesn't just stop at a blanket and screaming Cookie at random intervals throughout the game over and over again. Cookie! Cookie! He brought banners that said Cookie. He brought balloons with Cookie printed on them. He handed out business cards that said, Cookie, best third baseman in the league. He brought champagne and other booze in ice buckets. He bought tanks of hydrogen, not helium, hydrogen, for the balloons. To accommodate this, he bought out his entire box, consisting of 10 seats, and he needed to hire 2 cabs to get him and all these accoutrements to the ballpark. Stop and think about that for just half a second. If you try to bring all that stuff into the ballpark today, particularly a tank of hydrogen, which balloons are not, is a bomb. Not only would they stop you from entering, they'd label you a terrorist, call the FBI, and you'd be packed away to Fort Leavenworth or possibly Guantanamo. There's a 1943 article in Collier's magazine that actually went into some detail on Pierce. They itemized his expenses. It cost him $41.65 per game to do all this stuff. He spent $22 for all the box seats, $3.06 for 1 gross of Cookie balloons, $2.59 for a half gross of Ducky balloons, because he would vary it up sometimes with a little love for Joe Medwick now and again. And yes, you called it, those balloons were shaped like ducks. On occasion, he would release too many balloons at once, and they would get in the way of outfielders who were trying to track fly balls amidst all the floating objects. Or they would circle around Bill Terry playing first base for the Giants, and he tried to have Pierce ejected. And Terry already had reason to be annoyed with Pierce, because when the Dodgers hosted the Giants, he'd pull some kind of rubber fright mask on over his face and wear it all game to kind of put the hoodoo on the other team. He even once ticked Barber off because he had let go of so many balloons that Barber couldn't see the field to make his call of the game. He spent $1.50 for a taxi for himself and any friends he brought to the park, $1.50 for the taxi that carried the balloons and the tanks and that stuff, $7 for scotch, and $4 for ice, mineral water, and tips. $41.65 in 1943 dollars. If you take that figure and multiply it by 77 home games, if I'm reading my inflation calculator correctly, that's something like $50,000 a year in present-day value. That's a commitment. I hasten to add that if you read about Pierce, it sounds like he was a pretty good guy. You can find stories of him doing charitable things for hospitalized children and police benevolent associations. He entertained the players at his restaurants, got to know them a little bit. The restaurant
was Southern-oriented, specializing in cornbread, apparently. He just had this Lavagetto fetish, and it led him to sit at just about every Dodger home game and scream "Cookie" as loud as he possibly could for the duration of the game. Not everybody loved this, but the thing is there was no escaping it. You couldn't even get away from it at home because he was so loud, the crowd mic would pick it up and broadcast it all over Brooklyn. There's one other story about Pierce and Lavagetto that kind of demonstrates the dimensions of this relationship, if you can call it a relationship. The story doesn't identify the game, but I'm going to offer one that fits the details. May 8th, 1941, Cardinals at Dodgers. The Bums took an early 4-0 lead, but they played it back in the middle innings, and the game went to extras, tied 4-4. With 2 outs, in the bottom of the 12th, Medwick singled, and he moved up to second when Cardinals third baseman Jimmy Brown threw the ball away. That brings up Lavagetto. He's batting 5th that day, and almost any hit would score the winning run. Lavagetto goes up there. He's trying to win the game. He's feeling the pressure, and Pierce just keeps screaming his name. And Lavagetto, he can't hit that way. So he actually steps out of the box, walks over to the rail, and he asked Pierce to please just shut up, please, just for a minute. It might not have just been Pierce, by the way. In a wonderfully misogynistic touch, the Brooklyn Eagle noted in their game story that Brooklyn's all-time largest Ladies' Day crowd made ungodly noises throughout the game. This has never been said about a male-dominated crowd ever, but whatever. Lavagetto gets back in there and hits, and he pulls a bouncing grounder into the shortstop hole, and third baseman Brown, not having a great day, dives and gets just enough glove on it to knock it away from shortstop Marty Marion, and the winning run scores. Lavagetto rounds first, the Dodgers are crowding in at home plate, and as Cookie turns back to the infield, there's Pierce, tears streaming down his cheeks, saying, "Why?" The rejection, or what he perceived as the rejection by his hero, or possibly being brought face to face with the reality that he was not in fact supporting Cookie all those times that he was screaming his name, but in fact distracting him, was just too much for him to bear. During the war, when Lavagetto was gone, Pierce would still come to some games, inflate Cookie balloons and then pop them, shout "Ducky" half-heartedly and release those. I suppose it couldn't possibly be the same. And after the war, that famous at-bat in the 1947 World Series was Lavagetto's last in the major leagues. Pierce was still around in 1951 when Lavagetto rejoined the Dodgers as a coach. Said he would come out for that, but I imagine that wasn't the same either. Have you ever had someone in your life where there's no breakup, there's no falling out, but simply you change or they change or the circumstances around your relationship change such that at one moment in time, the relationship was quite intense, doesn't have to be romantic, but you were giving each other something that you needed at the time, and that energy only existed for that moment. And you're still there, and they're still there, and there's no reason that you don't reach out to each other, except that the moment has passed. And when you do talk, it doesn't have that same energizing, uplifting magic that it used to. And I kind of wonder if post-career Cookie and Jack were like that. And by the way, look around you. The idea that the electricity went out of a relationship because the spark only existed for a limited duration applies to many long-term marriages that you know. Some find another spark and reinvent themselves, but I suspect many more careen on through an oxymoronic combination of momentum and inertia. Pierce was, as far as I can tell, a successful businessman with a lot of different off-the-field interests. He was also a bachelor, and I don't know what he had in the way of family. But love seeks an outlet, doesn't it? The desire, the need to give and receive affection, it will center on someone or something, even if it's not in the traditional way that most of us select significant others, whether our interests are in men or women. We pair up. But when we can't pair up, well, I guess sometimes we just do other things, like get addicted to cookies. By Aquaman's off-duty bikini, we have come to the end of another show. This nobody can deny. To follow...
Here's where I used to say that you could find me and the guest on Twitter, but neither of us is on Twitter anymore. You can, however, find me at stephengoldman.bsky.social.
And of course, you can write us at infiniteinning@gmail.com. And don't forget to rate us at the podcatcher of your choice: Stitcher, Apple, Pineapple, Banana, Carmen Miranda's hat. It doesn't matter, just please. We have a sponsor now, but nevertheless, this episode is brought to you by the number 7. Our producer is Jabroni Randall. Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have in fact heard throughout the episode along with some other assorted stuff, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring. It's called The Infinite Man. Rick once told me that a mark of maturity is accepting that some of your dreams won't come true, some of your goals will go unmet. I can't decide if he's right or not, and I can't decide if I should try to talk either one of us out of it. Well, if the ghost of Ethel Merman doesn't possess Beyonce and release a single called There's No Business Like Lemonade, I'll be back next week with more tales and discussion from inside the Infinite Inning.